Sherlock Holmes and the Caldwell Manor Enigma. Chapter 1. Whispers of the Unexplained. The year was 1897, and a crisp chill hung over London's streets, threading mist through lamplit thoroughfares. I, Dr. John Watson, had not long returned from visiting an old acquaintance when I caught wind of a rumour so peculiar that it set my heart racing. Whispered accounts reached me of a foreboding mansion on the outskirts of the city, a decrepit estate where visitors had vanished without explanation. Those few who dared venture near spoke of strange lights in the windows and faint cries in the dead of night. The newspapers, hungry for sensational stories, seized upon each disappearance as further proof that the house was haunted, or so the gossip went. As a man of medicine and reason, I confess that the notion of ghosts and apparitions seldom entices me, but something in these rumours tugged at my curiosity. The more I read and heard of these vanishings, the more I felt an unaccountable urgency to learn the truth. Was it mere superstition, or was there some darker scheme at work beneath the tales of restless spirits? In another age I might have dismissed such stories outright. Yet my years of acquaintance with Mr. Sherlock Holmes had taught me that behind many a seemingly supernatural event lay a cunning human design. In the first days of my fascination, however, I found my ardour for the subject unreciprocated at 221 B. Baker Street. My friend and companion Sherlock Holmes was in the midst of his latest chemical investigations, a perplexing series of experiments concerning rare alkaloids. Day and night he laboured over his glass beakers and Bunsen burners, paying scarce attention to my excited recounting of the haunted mansion. "It is called Caldwell Manor," I informed him one evening, while the pungent odour of some compound rose in hazy curls around us. "The staff has fled, the villagers refuse to go near it, and the local constables are baffled. 3 have vanished already. Newspapers speak of curses and restless spirits." Holmes hunched over his apparatus, barely lifted his eyes. "Curses, dear Watson, are seldom more than the product of fevered imaginations. I'm afraid my time must be spent on more pressing concerns." "Even so," I replied, determined. "There must be an explanation. Do we not owe it to the missing to find out what really happened?" He offered a curt nod, but his attention soon returned to the fizzing solution before him. That night I resigned myself to the likelihood that the great detective would remain unmoved by these ghostly tales. Nevertheless, I pursued the subject on my own, poring over any scrap of information to be found in the dailies. The reports were distressingly consistent. Several unfortunate souls had ventured into Caldwell Manor's halls, intent on unmasking the cause of its strange phenomena, only to vanish without leaving even footprints behind. A few search parties had encountered locked doors and crumbling staircases, but no sign of the missing. Local rumour insisted the house was alive, claiming it swallowed its occupants whole. Of course, the rational side of my mind scoffed at such superstitions, yet the more I read, the more I felt a faint prickle of unease. In my years alongside Holmes, I had grown to trust in the improbable as merely a veil over the truly diabolical. Someone was responsible for these disappearances, though whether by cunning device or foul play I could not say. Days passed with Holmes subsumed in his chemical trials. I carried on in silence, consulting books on local law and soliciting accounts from anyone who claimed to know a detail of Caldwell Manor. One afternoon I walked home with a most remarkable story from a cab driver who had once delivered supplies to the mansion. He insisted he had seen a figure at an upper window, a silhouette that vanished the moment he tried to address it. Another account from an elderly villager described hearing shrieks echo through the night, though upon searching the grounds he found nothing but the crunch of his own footsteps on the gravel. That very evening, as I began drafting a letter to Inspector Lestrade proposing a private inquiry, my preoccupation with the Caldwell affair was interrupted by a knock on the door. our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, presented me with a telegram bearing the official crest of Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's elder brother, and, in many respects, a man of even sharper intellect and broader influence. I carried the telegram into Holmes's makeshift laboratory, where he still stood, sleeves rolled to the elbow, amid clouds of acrid smoke. "Holmes," I said, pressing the paper into his hand, "this has just arrived." He paused in his work to scan the message. I watched him closely, noting the instant furrow of his brow. Slowly he lowered the telegram and fixed me with a keen gaze. "It seems," he said at last, his voice subdued, "that we have a matter of some urgency, Watson. Mycroft advises me to investigate these alleged hauntings at once. There is a family of significance entangled in this, the Caldwells, who once stood high in London society, only to vanish under the most disturbing circumstances." I set aside my notepad, heart pounding at the shift in Holmes's demeanour. "Then you'll take the case? You'll look into Caldwell Manor after all?" A faint glimmer of resolve sparked in his grey eyes. "Certainly. My brother would not trouble himself to send such a missive unless it were of the gravest import. If Sir Edwin Caldwell and his household were indeed among the latest victims, we cannot disregard the situation as mere folklore." Holmes gathered his coat, his experiments abandoned as though they were trivial curiosities. "I shall make inquiries of Mycroft regarding any official or confidential knowledge of the Caldwell family. In the meantime, Watson, prepare whatever notes you have compiled on these disappearances. We leave for Caldwell Manor at first light." Thus, in the flickering lamplight of our sitting-room, the course was set. The haunting rumours that had so captured my imagination were now firmly within Sherlock Holmes's sights, and though a thrill of apprehension cut through me, I could not deny the stir of anticipation as well. For if there was any truth in the legends that cloaked Caldwell Manor, or if some cunning adversary hid behind its ancient walls, then Holmes and I would soon meet it face to face. Chapter 2. A dire revelation. A chill wind blew across Baker Street the following morning, rattling the panes as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared ourselves for the day's work. Even before dawn, Holmes had been restless, pacing the sitting-room with an energy I had not witnessed for weeks. My friend's fervour was ignited by the telegram from his brother, Mycroft, which hinted at matters of grave import tied to Caldwell Manor. Now, as the city's church bells tolled the hour, I sensed we stood upon the cusp of a shocking revelation. No sooner had I finished tying my cravat than Mrs. Hudson announced an unexpected visitor, a lean, pale young constable named Barrow. He entered with a tremor in his voice, removing his helmet in deference to my friend. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I am instructed by Inspector Lestrade to bring you this dispatch." He extended a sealed envelope bearing the official crest of Scotland Yard. "It concerns Caldwell Manor. A grim business, I'm afraid." Holmes accepted the envelope and slit it open with a penknife. His keen grey eyes flickered over the contents. When he looked up again, his expression was stony. "Watson," he said, "it appears the remains of the Caldwell family have been discovered, under circumstances that defy rational explanation." "Remains?" I repeated, startled. "Then they truly are dead?" Constable Barrow nodded. "A pair of local labourers were attempting to board up parts of the mansion at the request of the local authorities. They ventured into a blocked-off corridor and found skeletal remains bricked in, some with personal effects suggesting they belonged to Sir Edwin Caldwell and his household." A shiver passed through me. The Caldwell family had vanished under mysterious circumstances some time ago, their fate unknown, until now. "That's monstrous," I murmured. Holmes handed me the letter, then turned his attention to Barrow. "Have the men on site made any further discoveries?" Letters, documents, anything that might shed light on who orchestrated these atrocities? Barrow shook his head. Not yet, sir. They did find old stains on the walls and a room that looked as if someone had lived there recently. Beyond that, no clue. Holmes inclined his head. Thank you, Constable. Pray inform Inspector Lestrade that Dr. Watson and I shall depart for Caldwell Manor forthwith. Once Barrow departed, I scanned the letter from Scotland Yard. The language was terse, recounting how the Caldwell skeletons were arranged in a sort of grotesque tableau, as though placed there deliberately. More unnerving still was mention of possible disturbances in other rooms, footprints, perhaps recent, leading away from the sealed corridor. I looked up, unnerved. Holmes, there's something dreadful at play. You saw the reports of vanished constables, and now this. Could it be foul play of an even more horrific sort? Holmes gathered his coat and deerstalker hat. My dear Watson, let us not succumb to fear before the facts speak. We must examine the scene ourselves. At that very moment, Mrs. Hudson appeared once more, bearing another envelope. This one was sealed with a familiar monogram, M.H. Mycroft again, Holmes announced, tearing it open. As he read, I noticed a slight tightening about his features. He waved the letter at me to read over his shoulder. It revealed that Sir Edwin Caldwell had been no ordinary aristocrat. He had entertained close ties with several prominent figures in the government. Diplomatic secrets, foreign negotiations, and confidential financial dealings danced around his name. Mycroft's suspicion suggested that Sir Edwin's demise might be less a case of local misfortune and more a matter of political intrigue. Holmes cast the letter onto the table. You see, Watson, Sir Edwin was at the heart of influential circles. Such men attract formidable enemies. If the tragedy at Caldwell Manor is connected to his activities, it may be no common crime. Then the rumors of a haunted mansion might be a deliberate mask, I said, my voice hushed with realization. Some cunning villain could be fostering these superstitions to obscure more tangible misdeeds. Precisely, Holmes replied. We've encountered similar deceptions before. Recall the Hound of the Baskervilles. Rational minds must cut through the veil of superstition. Without further delay, we packed our necessities into a small valise. Holmes insisted on bringing a selection of forensic powders and reagents, evidence of how seriously he viewed the investigation. For my part, I secured my medical bag, silently praying I would not need its contents. We reached Waterloo Station at midday, the sky overhead as grey as the train's billowing steam. The ride to Hampstead was uneventful, yet tense. Holmes maintained a fierce silence, eyes fixed upon the window, though I knew his mind churned with myriad possibilities. The damp countryside blurred past, but my thoughts remained fixed upon Caldwell Manor and the grim fate of its occupants. By late afternoon, we found ourselves once more at the gates of that sombre estate, a structure wreathed in leafless trees and creeping ivy. The few villagers we passed regarded us with expressions of mingled pity and dread, as if we were doomed souls approaching the maw of some waiting beast. Even I felt a pang of disquiet upon glimpsing the mansion's dark windows, each like an empty eye socket staring from a skull. At the threshold, we were met by a shaken constable who led us to the scene of the macabre discovery. The air within the corridor was thick with dust and the faint odour of decay. In the gloom, I saw what must have once been a servant's passage, now blocked by rubble, but recently cleared enough to reveal a cramped space. There, lying on bare stone, were skeletal remains, still clothed in rags of what had once been fine garments. Holmes knelt down, candle held aloft, his gaze roving over the bones and the dim corners of the passage. "Watson," he said softly, We stand at the gateway of a deeper enigma. If the Caldwell family truly met their end here, it was not by accident. Someone arranged this, someone who feared the Caldwell name, or the secrets they carried. The flickering candlelight caught the hollows in the walls, revealing faint, spidery markings. A single drop of water struck the stone, echoing like a distant heartbeat. At that moment, I felt the weight of the tragedy with fresh force. The Caldwell name had once been spoken with respect across London. Now their only monument was a crypt of sorrow hidden beneath rotted timbers. Rising to his feet, Holmes set his jaw. Mycroft was correct. This is not merely a matter for the local constabulary. We shall unravel the cause of these unspeakable acts, Watson, and see justice done. I nodded, trusting that his indefatigable genius would pierce the shadows that enveloped Caldwell Manor. Little did I suspect how twisty the path would prove, or what horrors might yet lurk among the silent corridors of that ill-fated domain. Chapter 3. Entering the Halls of Dread. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Caldwell Manor's great hall, illuminating clouds of dust that danced in the stale air. Already Sherlock Holmes and I had spent several hours within those ancient walls, gathering what initial impressions we could. Owing to rumours of eerie lights and ghostly apparitions, Holmes had insisted we remain on site rather than commuting back to Baker Street. The tales of unexplained vanishings and spectral figures, once heard at a remove, now took on an unsettling immediacy in the mansion's hushed corridors. Despite our experience in challenging cases, we both felt a faint disquiet as we surveyed our surroundings. A broad, decaying staircase curved up to the first floor, its banister thick with cobwebs. Portraits of the Caldwell family, many coated with grime, stared down from the walls, their watchful gazes seeming both forlorn and reproachful. The disrepair was palpable, peeling wallpaper, cracked floorboards, and furniture shrouded in dusty sheets. Standing nervously in a corner, the lone housekeeper, Mrs. Hargreaves, twisted her apron in trembling hands. I never wanted to abandon the estate," she explained in a trembling voice. "But after the rumours and the vanishings, no one dares come near. The villagers say lights burn in the windows at midnight, and... oh, the footsteps." She trailed off, looking over her shoulder as though expecting a phantom to appear at any moment. Holmes approached her kindly. "You've done the manor a great service by staying, Mrs. Hargreaves. Any detail you recall, however small, may prove invaluable." He then gestured to the footprints visible on the dusty floor. "Tell me, have you seen these before?" In the fading daylight, the prints were distinct enough to suggest a recent origin. They led from the front door into one of the side corridors, then vanished abruptly by a locked parlour. Mrs. Hargreaves nodded, eyes wide. "I come here sometimes to dust, sir, but I seldom tread that way. The door at the end has been locked for as long as I can remember." Holmes withdrew a small magnifying lens from his pocket and dropped to one knee, meticulously examining the impressions. "Look, Watson," he said, beckoning me closer. "The soles indicate a man's shoe, but the depth suggests he was carrying something heavy. Notice how the print is deeper on one side, as though weighted down." "Indeed," I replied. "Could it be a trunk? A piece of furniture?" "Possibly." Holmes stood and addressed the housekeeper again. "Mrs. Hargreaves, would you kindly show us what you can of the mansion's locked rooms? Any keys, old or new, might prove necessary." She hesitated. "Some of the keys were lost when the family disappeared. But I'll gather what I have." As Mrs. Hargreaves hurried off, Holmes and I advanced into the corridor in question. The wallpaper here was tattered and damp, and the air felt stifling, as though it had not circulated for years. At a blind corner, I nearly tripped over a missing floorboard, the gap revealing beams and shadows below. A faint draught wafted upward, carrying with it a curious earthy smell. Holmes paused, nostrils flaring. "Strange," he remarked, kneeling to peer into the gap. "There's a space beneath this floor, likely the same foundation we saw in other sections. But this particular area is warm, or at least less cold, as though air is moving." He pressed an ear against the opening, listening. After a moment, he shook his head and rose. "No immediate clues there. Let us see if we can find a more conventional entry." Presently, Mrs. Hargreaves returned with a small ring of mismatched keys. She led us to the locked parlour, where Holmes tried them one by one until the rusty lock finally gave way with a protesting creak. We stepped inside to a chamber that appeared to have once been a gentleman's sitting room. A heavy writing desk stood against the far wall, an antique sideboard to the left. Dust motes glittered in the last rays of daylight, disturbed by our presence. Holmes's eyes lit on a door at the room's rear, a second exit locked from inside by a bolt. He unfastened it, revealing another corridor beyond, one not on the standard blueprint of a typical Victorian country house. The passage was narrow, dim, and chill. "Interesting," he observed. "It seems Caldwell Manor holds more than the usual allotment of hidden passages." We advanced with caution, the boards creaking beneath our weight. Like the corridor outside, footprints marked the dust here as well, though these prints were smaller, perhaps those of a child or a slender-footed individual. The route led us to a tight spiral staircase descending into near darkness. Mrs. Hargreaves peered warily down, refusing to proceed. Holmes lit a small lantern from his pocket kit. "Come, Watson," he said. "We shall see if these steps lead to any of the basements or sub-levels we have yet to explore. If you prefer to remain here, Mrs. Hargreaves, please do. I wouldn't advise you go alone elsewhere in the house until we return." She nodded, relief mingling with fear. We descended, lantern in hand, the narrow steps spinning us downward into the earth. The air cooled further, and the smell of damp stone grew stronger. I could hear the faint dripping of water somewhere distant, an echoing sound that made the entire place feel hollow and vast. At the bottom, we discovered a cramped landing that opened into a low-ceilinged room. Dust-laden shelves lined the walls, laden with what looked like old ledgers and cloth-bound volumes. In the lantern's glow, I could read the spines, household accounts, inventories of the estate's furnishings, and some that bore no title at all. The footprints continued, weaving among the shelves and vanishing through an archway to the right. Holmes lingered by one shelf in particular, running a finger across a faded label. "Property deeds," he murmured, brushing dust aside to reveal the Caldwell seal. Perhaps Sir Edwin attempted to reorganize or hide certain records before the family vanished. I studied the footprints once more. They certainly did not suggest casual exploration, rather they traced a direct path, as if the person knew precisely where they were headed. We ventured through the archway into a second room, only to find it disappointingly empty. No footprints, no crates, nothing but stale air. "They must have doubled back at some point," I suggested. Holmes nodded, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Or else they found what they sought and departed via another route." Returning to the desk upstairs, we discovered Mrs. Hargreaves waiting anxiously. She jumped at our sudden appearance. "Did you find anything, sirs?" Holmes offered a measured response. More curious footprints, and a hidden staircase leading to a sub-level with estate records. Nothing conclusive, yet it appears your absent visitors or inhabitants know this house's secrets better than anyone. As we left the parlour, evening shadows stretched across the corridors. Any illusions of a simple haunting had long since evaporated. We had, in fact, discovered the first real signs of active, purposeful movement throughout Caldwell Manor. Someone prowled these floors, unlocking and relocking doors, leaving footprints, and possibly searching for something. "Tonight," Holmes announced, "we'll focus our vigils on these hidden routes. If someone plans to roam again, we must be ready." So, with a renewed sense of urgency, we set about preparing for nightfall. The manor's decaying grandeur seemed almost alive, its neglected corners brimming with potential for hidden watchers. And though the gloom closed in like a physical presence, we would press forward, resolved to uncover who or what truly lurked within Caldwell Manor's forsaken halls. Chapter 4. Into the Gloom. Morning in Caldwell Manor brought little relief from the shadows that seemed to cling to every surface. Though the sun rose beyond the tattered curtains, its light remained weak and filtered, as though reluctant to enter such a forlorn place. After a fitful night's rest, Sherlock Holmes and I resolved to devote the entirety of the new day to exploring the mansion from attic to cellar. We hoped to unearth a rational explanation for the unsettling phenomena reported by Mrs. Hargreaves and the villagers. Our first task was to revisit the dusty chambers on the second floor, where we had glimpsed footprints and found abandoned furniture. Holmes moved quickly from room to room, examining cracks in the plaster, lifting carpets to check for signs of hidden passageways, and tapping at the walls in search of concealed panels. "If the rumors of ghostly apparitions are fueled by a living presence," he remarked, "then that presence must have a means of moving about unseen. Houses of this age often boast secret corridors, a boon to any miscreant with cunning enough to exploit them." We did, indeed, find suspicious irregularities. In one corridor, the wooden paneling bore deep scratches, as though someone had raked it with a knife or a sharp object. In another room, a half-burned letter lay among scattered papers on an old writing desk. The letter was fragmentary, with only a few lines legible. "Fear that our secrets will be revealed. My husband insists we stay. Dreadful voices at night. Must not let—" Holmes studied it intently, his lips pressed in a thin line. "Sir Edwin Caldwell, I surmise, or perhaps his wife. The mention of secrets and dread suggests a building tension within the family. We should examine any surviving correspondence more thoroughly." By midday, we had accumulated a small collection of clues, brittle papers hinting at conflict, scratch marks on walls, and footprints that began but never ended. We retired to the manor's drawing-room, which Mrs. Hargreaves had kindly tidied for our use. There, over a meagre lunch of bread and tea, Holmes rifled through the pages we had gathered, while I organized them as best I could by date and subject. Many were undated, the ink badly faded, but some hinted at financial troubles and pressing debts. Others implied a simmering feud, though whether with an external party or within the family itself was unclear. "Caldwell Manor was once a seat of opulence," Holmes mused, "yet it appears it faced considerable strife, debts, quarrels, and now these macabre discoveries. I am increasingly convinced someone profited or attempted to profit from the family's downfall." Our conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hargreaves, who appeared at the drawing-room door, wringing her hands. "Beg pardon, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, voice trembling. "I heard a door slam upstairs not 5 minutes ago, but I am certain I locked every corridor myself." Holmes leapt to his feet, eyes ablaze with renewed energy. "Show us at once." We followed her up the main staircase to a long, narrow hallway lined with dusty portraits. At the far end stood a heavy door with ornate carvings, which I recalled from our earlier exploration. Mrs. Hargreaves insisted she had locked it securely, yet it now stood ajar, scraping against the warped floorboards as though someone had forced it open. Pushing past it, we entered a chamber that might once have been a bedroom, though its walls were bare, and the bed frame dismantled. Dust motes swirled in the musty air. Holmes knelt to scrutinize the floor, his magnifying lens glinting in the half-light. "Fresh scuff marks," he muttered. "Someone was here very recently, wearing shoes with a distinctive tread, possibly a man's. Notice this irregular impression, Watson. Do you recall seeing such footprints in the corridor below?" I bent down to compare. Indeed, the faint outlines on the floorboards echoed the ones we had seen near the front hall, but there was no occupant in sight and not a single clue as to how they had come or gone. The room's single window was nailed shut, and the walls appeared intact. As dusk approached, we discovered further unsettling oddities. In a small parlour, the wallpaper had been peeled back in patches, revealing cryptic symbols scratched into the plaster. They resembled arcane runes, perhaps an attempt to stage a supernatural hoax. In the servants' wing, another half-burned note floated in a basin of stale water, its ink blurred beyond recognition. Pieces of a strange puzzle lay scattered about the manor, yet we had no overarching key to bind them together. Night descended swiftly, bringing with it an oppressive hush. Holmes recommended we maintain a vigil, hoping the intruder might betray their movements under cover of darkness. We stationed ourselves at separate vantage points, with Mrs. Hargreaves safely ensconced behind locked doors. I took the second-floor landing, armed with a lantern and my revolver, while Holmes prowled the ground-floor corridors. The hours slipped by without incident, until close to midnight, when I heard a muted thump from somewhere below. I crept down the stairs, lantern held high, my heart pounding in my chest. At the end of a dim hallway, I nearly collided with Holmes, who had also raced to pinpoint the noise. Together we advanced into the bowels of the manor, a corridor leading toward the old wine cellars. There the darkness seemed almost alive, shifting with each flicker of our lanterns. Abruptly, the entire house felt charged with tension. Every creak of the floor seemed magnified, every gust of wind at the windows a spectral moan. Though neither Holmes nor I spoke of fear, there was an undeniable weight upon us as we descended uneven steps into the cellar. Shelves of rotting casks lined the walls, and spiderwebs swayed in the draughty gloom. We found no intruder, only the lingering echo of that mysterious thump. At last we retreated upstairs, our search yielding nothing but an intensifying sense of disquiet. Caldwell Manor, it seemed, refused to yield its secrets easily. Yet Holmes, ever resolute, would not be deterred. He assured me that our efforts were indeed closing in on a hidden truth, one that mere superstition could never fully obscure. Thus ended our second full day within Caldwell Manor, the gloom both literal and metaphorical. Sleep came fitfully, and I dreamt of disembodied footsteps and cryptic markings on cold stone walls. If there was to be a rational explanation for these rumors of hauntings, we had yet to uncover it. But Holmes and I vowed to press onward, determined that neither midnight apparitions nor chilling silence would shake our resolve. Chapter 5. The Journal of Sir Edwin Caldwell. Daylight filtered through the smudged windows of Caldwell Manor with reluctant pallor, as though the morning itself shared our unease. Sherlock Holmes and I had spent another restless night, patrolling the corridors in vain search of the mysterious presence that seemed to haunt the premises. We found only whispers of its passing, faint sounds, shadows that fled at our approach, and the ever-present spectre of dread. It was late morning when Mrs. Hargreaves timidly sought us out in the dusty library. "Sirs," she quavered, holding out a small iron key on a ribbon, "I've remembered something. Sir Edwin used to keep a private study on the third floor, in the north wing. He never allowed the other staff inside. Once I saw him lock the door with this key." Perhaps you may find something there." Holmes's eyes lit with keen interest. "You've done well, Mrs. Hargreaves. We shall investigate at once." The north wing, like much of the manor, was in a state of grave neglect. Its corridors were lined with portraits shrouded in grey sheets, and the windows let in only meagre slivers of light. At last we came to a door fitted with a brass plate inscribed S.E.C., the initials, of course, for Sir Edwin Caldwell. We tried the key, and it turned with a rusty protest. Inside we discovered a cramped but well-appointed room, an atmosphere of quiet secrecy woven into every detail. Shelves of ledgers and books lined the walls. A worn leather armchair faced a fireplace still laid with half-burned logs. Dust sheeted the desk. Holmes immediately began examining drawers and pigeonholes, methodical as ever. Within minutes, he drew out a slim volume bound in cracked, dark green leather. "Watson," he said, lifting the journal so I could see it. "The personal diary of Sir Edwin Caldwell." A hush fell between us as we realized the significance of the find. With great care, Holmes opened the diary to its initial pages, scanning the neat script. The earliest entries were ordinary enough, mention of estate finances, guests arriving for weekend hunts, and minor concerns about the manor's upkeep. As he flipped further, however, the tone shifted. "The later entries," Holmes murmured, "they grow uneasy." He placed the diary on the desk, and together we read March 3rd. Strange footsteps in the night. Went to investigate, found no one in the corridors. Could it be imagination? Yet others in the house report hearing it too. March 11th. Doors refused to open, though they are not locked. Heard a child sobbing, but upon searching every room, found none. March 15th. Margaret says she saw a shadow pass through the wall. I cannot abide such superstitions, yet there is an unspoken terror gripping the household. Even the servants whisper of ghosts. The entries continued in that vein, each new notation more alarmed than the last. Sir Edwin wrote of how he had considered dismissing the tales as mere hysteria until he himself experienced doors slamming behind him without cause, sometimes locking themselves when no key was turned. He documented sightings of an indistinct figure at the upper window, and more disturbingly the sensation that someone stood behind him at all hours. Halfway through the diary, we encountered a particularly revealing entry. "Thank you so much, my old 25, if you like the story. At first, this is like the channel your unwavering sense of disgust motivated or a thief. But these events grow more puzzling by the day. The staff are frightened, and I cannot calm them. My wife begs we leave Caldwell Manor immediately, but how can we abandon our home? Our finances are perilous, and I fear scandal if we fail to meet our obligations here." Holmes read this passage twice. "A family in distress, Watson. He is torn between duty to this estate and the mounting fear of something he cannot name." Further on, the final entries took an ominous turn. April 2nd, children. Wake at night, crying of whispers. I heard them myself today, like voices calling from the walls. Doors locked me in the study for an hour, though the key lay on my desk. Some force toying with us? I cannot sleep. April 5th. Margaret insists an evil presence resides here, but I remain unconvinced. Could it be sabotage from a mortal hand? Someone aims to drive us from our home. My heart lurches at every sound. We cannot go on like this. At this, the journal ended abruptly, as if Sir Edwin's fears had overtaken him before he could finish. The blank pages that followed were thick with dust, their edges unturned. We exchanged glances, the weight of the revelation settling over us. Holmes closed the diary, his expression severe. So there were indeed unexplained occurrences, footsteps, locked doors, voices. Caldwell's final note suggests he suspected a flesh-and-blood adversary, employing these tricks to torment the family. That is in line with our own observations. Yet the full truth remains elusive. I nodded, recalling the half-burned letters and cryptic scratches we had uncovered elsewhere. This diary confirms the family's mounting dread, but it also underscores that these hauntings may have been staged to conceal a criminal plot. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window, and a swirl of leaves skittered across the sill. The mere thought of someone orchestrating such a cruel charade within these walls set my nerves on edge. Holmes snapped the diary shut. Sir Edwin's words are invaluable, Watson. They reveal a family under siege, financially vulnerable and haunted by a cunning force. These so-called ghosts likely serve to frighten the Caldwells and any meddling staff into compliance or confusion. We left the study, diary in hand, and found Mrs. Hargreaves waiting in the corridor, her anxious face betraying her worry. Holmes assured her we were making progress, though the clues we discovered were far from comforting. She asked if we might share what we had learned, but Holmes gently demurred. "Not yet, madam," he said. "The picture remains incomplete, but rest assured, we draw closer to understanding what befell this household." That evening, seated by a modest fire in the library, Holmes and I pored over the Caldwell diary once more, cross-referencing each entry with the scraps of evidence in our possession. A horrifying portrait emerged, a once proud family gradually worn down by unexplained torment. Their final days had been filled with dread, culminating in the unspeakable fate we now strove to illuminate. Yet, as Holmes reminded me, each supernatural flourish bore the hallmarks of human cunning: strategically placed footprints, cunningly locked doors, whispered voices in the dead of night. The so-called haunting, it seemed, was a mask behind which a sinister design was unfolding. Our challenge now was to tear that mask aside and expose the hand of the villain lurking in Caldwell Manor's shadows. Chapter 6. Secrets Beneath the Floorboards. A damp chill hung in the corridors of Caldwell Manor the following morning, setting my nerves on edge as Sherlock Holmes and I continued our investigation. The discovery of Sir Edwin Caldwell's private journal had cast fresh light upon the family's final days, yet the mystery of what truly haunted these halls only deepened. Whispers of footsteps and locked doors now yielded to a new puzzle. A strange draught in the rear corridor, where no window or vent could account for such a gust of air. Ever attuned to the subtlest incongruities, Holmes paused in that corridor, a place seldom used even when the estate thrived. He raised a hand to still me. "Do you feel it, Watson?" he asked quietly. A faint breeze stirred the back of my neck, its source elusive. I nodded. The corridor's plaster walls appeared intact, but along one side the wooden floorboards gave a faint creak, and a thread of cold air seeped up between them. Holmes knelt down, running his fingers over the seams. "These boards are different," he murmured. "Either replaced at some point or deliberately arranged." We fetched a lantern and pried up one of the boards. Sure enough, beneath lay a thin gap. With cautious determination, Holmes tested the adjacent boards until one rose on concealed hinges. There, hidden beneath layers of dust, lay a hatch secured by a small iron latch. "Curious indeed," Holmes said in a low voice. "The estate's original plans mentioned no sublevel in this wing." My heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and unease as we undid the latch. The hatch opened onto a narrow flight of stone steps plunging into darkness. A stale, cold draught gusted upward, whispering of spaces long forgotten, or perhaps furtively used. We armed ourselves with candles and carefully descended into the gloom. A cramped tunnel awaited us at the bottom, its walls of rough-hewn stone. The passage stretched on, lit only by our flickering flames. At intervals the stones bore strange marks, half-obliterated carvings of spirals and angular symbols that defied immediate identification. "What can you make of these, Holmes?" I asked, one hand tracing a spiral that circled itself thrice before breaking into jagged lines. Holmes studied the carvings with narrowed eyes. "They are not typical masonry marks, nor do they match known alphabets. They may be an invented script or symbolic scrawling by someone dabbling in esoteric matters. It would not be the first time unscrupulous persons used occult trappings to intimidate others." We pressed on, the tunnel's silence punctuated by the soft drip of moisture somewhere in the darkness. Before long, the corridor opened into a low-ceilinged chamber. The air was thicker there, tinged with a faint odor of spent candles and something more pungent, perhaps incense or chemicals. At the center stood a crude table, ringed by a circle of symbols similar to those on the walls. Holmes moved forward cautiously, lantern held aloft. "This is no idle hideaway," he observed. "It appears to have been used for gatherings. Clandestine ones, by the look of it." Around the makeshift altar lay scattered remnants, charred stubs of black candles, scraps of paper marked with cryptic words, and stains on the stone floor hinting at spilled liquids, possibly wax, possibly something more unsettling. I stooped to pick up one of the torn scraps. It bore a spidery script of strange letters, the writing so erratic it seemed almost feverish. "This is quite beyond the realm of typical country superstition," I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. "Someone has gone to great lengths to create or mimic a ritual setting." Holmes nodded, his keen gaze roaming the shadows. "Indeed, whether these rituals were genuine or staged, they serve a purpose. Fear can be a powerful weapon." As we explored the chamber, Holmes noticed footprints near one corner, a series of overlapping impressions in the grime. He knelt to examine them under the lantern's glow. "Several sets of prints," he murmured. "I see at least 2 distinct sizes, possibly more. These are no mere relics from the Caldwell family's time. The prints look relatively recent." A shiver coursed through me. Then we are not alone in these depths. Holmes stood, his expression grave. "Someone, or multiple persons, continues to use this subterranean space. If Sir Edwin Caldwell's final journal entries suggest he suspected a living adversary masquerading as a haunting, this chamber stands as compelling evidence. The so-called ghosts upstairs may well be intruders coming and going through hidden passages like this one." We pressed on to the far side of the chamber, where the passage split into 2 narrower tunnels. One was partially collapsed, a heap of rubble blocking further progress. The other, though cramped, bore fresh scuff marks on the walls, as if someone had recently squeezed through. "Shall we continue?" I asked, my throat tight. Yet I knew we had little choice if we hoped to unravel the full truth. Holmes led the way, sliding sideways along the tunnel's damp walls. After several yards, it opened into a second, smaller chamber, empty, save for more scrawled symbols on the walls. The floor here showed no footprints, suggesting that whoever used these tunnels favored the main chamber we had just left. At length, we doubled back to the first chamber, where we spent another hour cataloguing the items scattered about. Holmes carefully collected samples of the black candle wax, bits of charred paper, and a small file we found under the table. At one point, I thought I detected a faint sound, like a whisper, or a shifting of stones from somewhere deeper within the labyrinth. But when we rushed to investigate, only silence greeted us. "We have gleaned enough for one day," Holmes said at last, though reluctance shadowed his face. Further forays will require more thorough preparation, and possibly the assistance of the local constabulary. Returning to the corridor above, we resealed the hatch, ensuring we left no trace that might alert any hidden lurkers to our discovery. Then, stepping once more into the dim lamplight of Caldwell Manor's back passage, we stood in unsettled reflection on what we had found below. "Those footprints prove that the mansion's secrets remain in use," I remarked, lowering my voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. Holmes agreed. "We have delved beneath the floorboards and found not restless spirits, but an active, organized scheme, whether fraudulent or perhaps more sinister yet. By all appearances, someone orchestrated bizarre rituals to cultivate an atmosphere of fear. The question remains, to what end? Thus, laden with samples and more questions than answers, we emerged from the hidden depths of Caldwell Manor. Though the day's discoveries were sobering, we felt a renewed sense of purpose. The labyrinth below the manor would, we hoped, supply the final pieces of the puzzle, a puzzle that promised to reveal not only the fate of the Caldwell family, but the identity of the living adversary who stalked these haunted halls. Chapter 7. The Web Tightens. The tension in Caldwell Manor grew palpable in the days following our exploration beneath the floorboards. Sherlock Holmes, fortified by the discovery of clandestine gatherings in the hidden chambers, worked with renewed vigor to piece together the final threads of this puzzle. We had assembled an ever-growing collection of evidence, from strange symbols carved on stone to footprints in the labyrinth beneath the house, and each new clue seemed to confirm that human design, not spectres, haunted this forsaken estate. Yet despite our diligence, the elusive orchestrators of these uncanny events continued to slip through our fingers. One late afternoon, as we gathered in the ground-floor library to revisit Sir Edwin Caldwell's diary, and the cryptic fragments we had unearthed in the cellar, Mrs. Hargreaves interrupted us in a state of distress. "Dr. Watson," she cried, "someone is upstairs in Sir Edwin's private study. I heard a crash, the sound of furniture overturning." Holmes sprang from his seat. "Watson, quickly, we must not let them escape." We seized our lanterns and ascended to the third floor. The corridor leading to Sir Edwin's study was dim, illuminated only by the last slanting rays of the setting sun. My pulse quickened. It was here, only days before, that we had discovered the Caldwell patriarch's hidden journal. If indeed an intruder now rifled through the same desk, they might be after further evidence, perhaps documents that could crack this mystery wide open. Cautiously, we approached the door, which stood half open. A lamp within cast flickering shadows across the threshold. Holmes motioned for silence, and I nodded. Then in a single, fluid movement he burst into the study, I close on his heels. The scene was one of disarray, drawers yanked from the desk, papers strewn across the floor. Before us, a cloaked figure spun around, eyes wide, beneath the brim of a broad hat. In that fleeting instant, I caught a glimpse of a face partially obscured by a scarf, startled and fierce, ready to bolt. "Stop!" I shouted, raising my lantern. "You have no right." But the intruder was quick. Ignoring me, they darted toward a window at the back of the room, where tattered curtains billowed in the draught. Holmes lunged, attempting to intercept, but misjudged the figure's agility. The intruder ducked beneath his grasp and shoved him aside with surprising strength. A second later, they vaulted through the open window frame. "Holmes!" I cried, stumbling to the ledge, half expecting to see the intruder sprawled upon the ground below, but I found only creeping ivy rustling against the stone exterior. Far below, in the mansion's neglected courtyard, I glimpsed the figure disappearing into the twilight, moving with eerie swiftness. Holmes stood, catching his breath. "A daring exit," he muttered. No typical thief, I venture. We took a moment to steady ourselves. The silence left in the intruder's wake was deafening. Mrs. Hargreaves, who had hovered in the corridor, now entered with trembling steps. "Did you see who it was?" Holmes shook his head. "Only a partial glimpse, a hat, a scarf, likely a disguise." It was then that I noticed scraps of paper near my feet, torn in the scuffle. Bending down, I gathered them. Yellowed fragments, covered in cramped handwriting. At once, I recognized the same style as the half-burned letters and diaries we had been studying. "Holmes," I said, holding out the scraps. "They've torn up a document, something that may have belonged to Sir Edwin." He stepped closer, retrieving his magnifier. The pieces contained sentences half lost to time and damage. "The estate is more than a home. It is an obligation we can ill afford. Danger grows. We stand to lose." Even as fragments, these words hinted at financial woes and looming threats, matters we already suspected played a part in the Caldwell tragedy. "This intruder," Holmes said, "clearly seeks to destroy any remaining records that might expose the truth." He turned to Mrs. Hargreaves. "Madam, you mentioned a crash. Was anything else disturbed?" She shook her head, wringing her hands nervously. "I only heard the noise, Mr. Holmes, and came straight to fetch you and Dr. Watson." Holmes proceeded to inspect every inch of the room, searching for fresh footprints or signs of a secondary exit. The study had only one door, and the single window now stood wide open to the settling dusk. As he examined the windowsill, he discovered several fresh scrapes on the stone ledge where boots had evidently impacted. "Watson," he murmured gravely, "this is a planned intrusion. Whoever fled through the window almost certainly scaled the ivy to reach the ground. It suggests they know the house intimately, or at least have reconnoitered it thoroughly." I gazed at the disordered desk, my thoughts churning. "Holmes, might this intruder be linked to the gatherings we suspect occurred beneath the manor? The footprints in that hidden chamber indicate more than one conspirator." Holmes nodded, a distant intensity in his eyes. "Yes, I suspect so. Even from these scraps it seems Sir Edwin's finances and obligations placed him in a vulnerable position. The ghostly illusions, locked doors, chilling footsteps, likely served as part of a grander scheme, either to force him into compliance or to drive him, and, by extension his family, out of the manor. Perhaps both." Mrs. Hargreaves leaned against the desk, her face pale. "That they should resort to such vile methods, is it greed, Mr. Holmes, or revenge?" "Possibly both," Holmes replied, "but we must not jump to conclusions without further proof." We spent the remainder of the evening collecting the torn scraps and piecing them together as best we could, though many segments were missing. The partial sentences spoke of mounting debts, warnings of an unspecified threat, and references to an agreement that Sir Edwin had been coerced into honouring. While no single page declared a clear accusation, the subtext was unmistakable. A formidable party wished the Caldwell family ill, and was leveraging the estate's troubles to do so. Later, as we reconvened in the library, heart still pounding from the near capture, Holmes stared at our fragments upon the table. "This intruder's desperation suggests the final revelations must be close at hand," he said softly. "They strike now, hoping to shield themselves by destroying evidence. If we trace the money and the old alliances that bound Sir Edwin to London's elite, we may well expose the entire conspiracy." Night had fully settled upon Caldwell Manor. The corridors were filled with a familiar hush, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the dusty grandfather clock. Yet beneath this veneer of silence, I could sense an invisible web tightening, fueled by greed, vengeance, or both, drawing us inexorably toward the truth behind the Caldwell family's demise. Holmes's resolute gaze fixed upon the scattered papers. "We have survived mere illusions, Watson," he remarked. "Now we must confront the true architects of this scheme. Let us see how well they fare against observation, logic, and the unrelenting light of investigation." I nodded, inhaling a steadying breath. The stage was set, the foes had shown their hand. We stood on the threshold of a final unveiling, determined to bring justice to this haunted estate and reveal the culprits who had so ruthlessly woven fear into its every stone. Chapter 8. Unmasking the Mastermind. A hush hung in the corridors of Caldwell Manor that morning, as though the house itself anticipated the moment of reckoning. Sherlock Holmes and I had passed a sleepless night piecing together the remnants of Sir Edwin's torn documents, correlating each fragment with clues from the hidden tunnels and the cryptic gatherings beneath the floorboards. What emerged was a tapestry of betrayal, greed, and meticulously orchestrated terror. The final stroke of revelation came in the form of a legal ledger Holmes unearthed in an old strong-box at the back of Sir Edwin's study. Within its pages lay the names of Caldwell relatives scattered across England, some estranged, some apparently on decent terms, but one, in particular, stood out. Barnabas Caldwell, a distant cousin once rumoured to have been disinherited by Sir Edwin himself. Marginal notes in Sir Edwin's sharp hand referenced disputes over property and allegations of unsound character. An individual with motive, means, and a shadowy past, Holmes declared, setting the ledger aside. If Barnabas believed he was cheated of his rightful inheritance, he might employ any manner of ruse to claw it back. By mid-afternoon, we had summoned Inspector Lestrade and a handful of determined constables to Caldwell Manor. Bearing lanterns, we led them into the subterranean tunnels, Holmes intending to lay a trap. There, in the dimly lit chamber, where we had discovered ritualistic symbols and footprints, we arranged ourselves so as to watch each exit discreetly. With tension thrumming in the air, we waited. Our vigil proved not in vain. Shortly before dusk, the distant echo of footsteps drifted through the darkness, lanterns were quickly muffled, and we pressed against the damp walls. Heart-pounding, I glimpsed a small group entering the chamber by way of the corridor we had left unguarded, evidently believing no one could be there. Leading them was a tall, gaunt figure in a cloak, none other than the intruder who had fled Sir Edwin's study. Flanking him were two other men, each carrying sacks that clinked with what sounded like metal, perhaps stolen valuables left undiscovered when the Caldwell family vanished. Holmes signalled silently, and Lestrade's men surged forward, revolvers drawn. A cry of alarm rang out from one of the cloaked figures, who tried to dash back into the tunnel, but Holmes, quick as lightning, barred their path, the narrow corridor forcing the group to halt. Within seconds, the constables had them cornered. The gaunt leader let out a furious hiss and threw back the cloak's hood. By our lantern light, I could now see him clearly, a pallid man with features that might once have been handsome, but were now etched by years of resentment. He glowered at Holmes, lips curling in a sneer. "Barnabas Caldwell, I presume?" Holmes said calmly. "Your attempts to disguise yourself were skillful, but hardly enough to thwart proper investigation, especially once we found your name in Sir Edwin's private ledger." Barnabas spat on the damp stone floor. "He robbed me of what was mine," he snarled. "The Caldwell fortune, the estate, everything snatched away by that arrogant old man. Why should I not reclaim it through any means necessary?" Holmes's eyes flashed. "Including murder and staged hauntings to terrify the legitimate heirs? You orchestrated the family's disappearance, did you not?" At this, Barnabas's face contorted in raw anger. Sir Edwin and his brood were nearly bankrupt, yet clung to their precious name. The fools refused my offers, refused to share what they never truly owned. So I set about convincing them Caldwell Manor was cursed, tormenting them with noises and illusions until they were ripe for destruction. The final blow came when they tried to flee, but I locked their escape routes, herded them like sheep. He paused, voice trembling with malice. You will find their bones in these walls, hidden away with their secrets. A chill overcame me, remembering the ghastly discovery of the Caldwell remains. Lestrade stepped forward, voice taut with revulsion. The law will have you for these crimes, Barnabas Caldwell, along with whoever aided your foul deeds. The two henchmen, seeing their cause was lost, offered no resistance. They glanced from Barnabas to the armed constables, faces pale with fear. One muttered bitterly that they had only done what was asked, never realizing how far Barnabas intended to take the scheme. The entire haunting had been meticulously staged, locked doors rigged with strings, ghostly footsteps created by cunning contraptions, and even the eerie childlike cries at night. Recorded noises amplified through hidden vents. Any genuine superstition among the staff had been exploited to sow terror. Also Barnabas could claim the estate uncontested. Within the hour, Lestrade and his men had secured the villains, leading them above ground into the waning daylight. Barnabas, sputtering oaths, could not escape the iron grip of the law he had so long evaded. For the first time since we entered the manor, a suffusion of relief touched the air. Holmes and I found Mrs. Hargreaves in the front hall, watching the arrests with eyes misty from both shock and relief. "So it was never a haunting after all," she whispered, voice trembling. "All those terrors, nothing but a monstrous illusion." "An illusion built on cunning and cruelty," Holmes affirmed gently. "But rest assured, Mrs. Hargreaves, the perpetrators will face due justice." As Lestrade led the prisoners away, we stood at the threshold of Caldwell Manor, gazing upon its battered facade. The old estate, stripped of its phantasms, now presented a mournful rather than terrifying sight, a stark testament to how greed, envy, and revenge can defile even the stateliest of homes. The ghosts here, we now knew, were not spirits of the dead but the darkest impulses of the living. In the silence that followed, Holmes paused to light his pipe. "A pity that wealth and ambition should drive a man to such lengths," he remarked softly. I nodded, recalling Sir Edwin's journal entries, and the last days of a family besieged by horrors they could scarcely comprehend. At least the truth is brought to light, and Caldwell Manor can rest. As for the missing, though we cannot revive them, we may restore their memory to some semblance of dignity. We departed that same afternoon, our carriage rattling away from the gates and onto the winding road back toward London. Passing villagers watched with cautious relief, for the menacing spectre that once gripped the manor had been laid bare and apprehended. Though Holmes wore his usual air of composure, I sensed his quiet satisfaction at another case resolved, albeit with a tragic ending. As we receded into the distance, the sun broke free from its veil of clouds, casting Caldwell Manor in a final golden light. One might imagine, from that gentle glow, the old house's sigh of relief. A burden lifted, its hidden miseries at last exposed. And so we left Caldwell Manor behind, its halls no longer echoing with phantom steps, but with the promise of truth reclaimed from the shadows.